Welcome to the Curiosity Exchange by Fahawa Studios.
Hmm.
This is where we love to dig into things that seem familiar, maybe even obvious, and then, well, find the hidden story, the stuff you might not know. Today, we're looking at something absolutely central to American identity, Independence Day. We all know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
July 4th. Fireworks lighting up the sky, parades, BBQs. It's a huge deal. But what is the real story, the actual moment the U.S. declared itself independent? What if that story isn't quite so neat? What if the real birthday is actually, well, maybe 2 days earlier?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Because July 4th feels so permanent, so ingrained. It's the date we've all grown up with, the cornerstone. But the historical journey, how we landed on July 4th as a day, it's full of nuance. There's strategy involved, political maneuvering, arguments, even, a little bit of historical irony.
Right.
And our mission today really is to unpack all of that, to connect those dots for you. We want to link up those forgotten votes, the crucial decisions with the famous documents everyone recognizes, and then tie it all back to the traditions you enjoy today.
Exactly. We want to give you that shortcut to being really well-informed. Go beyond the headlines.
So you can appreciate the 4th of July on a whole new level, knowing the complex human story behind it.
So let's do it. Let's take this holiday we all know and really explore its hidden origins, how it all came together, and why it still matters so much today. Prepare to maybe rethink a few things. It should be a really interesting exploration. Okay, so let's just jump right in with the biggest spoiler, maybe, the core surprise. The day the United States formally declared independence, the actual day the Continental Congress voted to cut ties with Great Britain, that day wasn't July 4th.
Nope. That's the bombshell right there.
So when was it?
The key date, the moment the legal break happened, was July 2, 1776.
July 2nd, 2 days earlier.
Exactly. That was when Richard Henry Lee's resolution passed, and it was unambiguous. It stated quite clearly that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states.
Wow. So that was the actual declaration, the legal act.
That was the political and legal moment of separation. Think about it. In Philadelphia, the delegates knew what this meant. This wasn't just signing some paper. This was treason against the British crown.
High stakes doesn't even begin to cover it.
Absolutely. They were committing to war, essentially. A complete, irreversible break. And that Lee resolution, it wasn't just one sentence. It had sort of three main parts.
Okay.
First, the clear break. Free and independent states. Done with the crown. Second, it pushed them to seek foreign alliances. They knew they couldn't fight Britain alone. France was key, obviously.
Makes sense. Needed backup.
Critically needed it. And third, it called for creating a confederation, a plan for the states to actually govern themselves together.
So July 2nd was the decision, the legal action, the commitment.
Precisely. The die was cast on July 2nd. No formal declaration document signed yet, just the resolution making independence official. The decision was made.
Okay, so if the huge, life-altering vote happened on July 2nd, why all the fuss about July 4th? What were they doing for those 2 days in between? It seems weird that the paperwork overshadowed the actual decision.
It does seem counterintuitive, but it really highlights how history gets remembered, right? Versus how it unfolds minute by minute. So after that massive vote on the 2nd, they didn't just, call it a day. They immediately pivoted to crafting the public explanation, the document that would justify this extraordinary act to the American people and, importantly, to the world.
Ah, okay, the justification.
Exactly. They spent all of July 3rd and then worked right through the morning and into the afternoon of July 4th, going over the draft of the Declaration of Independence, line by line, word by word.
The famous document.
Yeah.
And that was Jefferson's work, mainly.
Jefferson was the primary author, absolutely. He was on the Committee of Five, tasked with drafting it.
With Adams, Franklin?
Yep.
Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Robert Livingston of New York, a heavyweight committee. But while Jefferson penned that initial eloquent draft, the final version, that was very much a group effort.
So lots of debate and changes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Congress debated it intensely. They revised it, cut sections, tweaked phrasing. It wasn't just Jefferson's voice anymore. It was the voice of the Congress.
So the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't the act of declaring independence itself. It was more like the press release. The big announcement explaining why they did it on July 2nd.
That's a great way to put it. It was the philosophical justification, the argument for liberty, the case they were making to mankind. They needed to rally support at home, convince potential allies like France, and inspire people to fight for this new nation. Words were weapons here.
Powerful stuff. It had to be persuasive.
Immensely persuasive. Every edit was strategic. They weren't just fixing typos. They were honing a message for the ages. They understood this revolution needed a powerful narrative, a clear statement of purpose to have any chance of success. Okay, so fast forward through July 3rd and into July 4th. They're debating, editing.
Right, hammering out that final text.
And then late in the afternoon on July 4, 1776, they finally reach agreement. Congress approves the final wording.
That's the moment.
And this is when, supposedly, the Liberty Bell rang out. Though that might be more legend than fact, right?
Yeah, the story of the Liberty Bell cracking right then is probably a later embellishment, but the adoption itself was certainly momentous news.
Or crucially, for how we remember it, the President of Congress, John Hancock.
With his famous signature.
Right. He and the Secretary, Charles Thompson, they signed that approved manuscript copy right away.
Immediately. And that copy went straight to the printer, a guy named John Dunlap.
The Dunlap broadsides.
Exactly. And this is the key reason the document itself is dated in Congress, July 4, 1776. That date marks when the document was officially adopted and sent off to be printed and spread everywhere.
So the date on the paper people actually saw was July 4th.
Precisely. Dunlap printed about 200 copies that very night. These posters, essentially with Hancock's name printed at the bottom, were the breaking news bulletin. They were dispatched immediately to the armies, state assemblies, committees of safety, getting the word out fast. And this is where it gets really human and honestly kind of poignant. John Adams.
Who was a huge force behind independence, right?
Absolutely. A driving force, but he had a very different idea about which date should be celebrated. He wrote this incredibly famous letter to his wife, Abigail.
On July 3rd.
Yes, on July 3rd, 1776. So after the vote for independence, but before the Declaration document was finalized, and in this letter he predicts with absolute certainty that July 2nd will be the day everyone remembers.
He really thought the 2nd was it.
He was utterly convinced. He wrote, and this is such a great quote, "The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America." Epocha, like era-defining moment.
Wow. And he didn't stop there, did he? He described how it should be celebrated.
Oh, yeah. He envisioned it all. He said it ought to be commemorated with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore.
That sounds exactly like the 4th of July.
It is. It's the blueprint for our modern celebration, but he attached it firmly to July 2nd.
That's incredible. The irony is just, wow. So Adams was basically predicting the future celebration, just off by 2 days.
Totally. History took a different path than he expected, and apparently in later life, Adams could be a bit stubborn about it.
I read he sometimes refused to attend July 4th events.
That's the story. He supposedly held firm that July 2nd was the real anniversary, almost as a point of principle. His conviction was that strong.
It really shows how significant that act of voting for independence on the 2nd felt to those who were there, especially someone like Adams who pushed so hard for it.
For him, the decision, the legal break, that was the revolutionary moment, the true birth. But history and public memory often latch onto the symbol, the tangible thing. And that became the Declaration, dated July 4th.
Okay, so we have the vote on the 2nd, the document adoption and printing on the 4th. But wait, there's more complexity, right? The signing wasn't all done on the 4th either.
Not even close for most people. This adds another fascinating layer. While Hancock and Thompson did that initial signing on the manuscript for the printer on July 4th, the famous parchment copy, the one we picture with all those signatures beautifully written out.
The one in the National Archives.
That exact one. The formal signing ceremony for that engrossed copy happened much later.
When?
On August 2nd, 1776, almost a full month after the Declaration was adopted.
A month later. Why the delay?
Well, first they had to actually prepare that official parchment copy. It had to be carefully handwritten, engrossed, as they called it. Then, on August 2nd, delegates gathered specifically for the purpose of signing it. It was a very deliberate, formal act.
And did everyone sign on August 2nd?
Most of them did. Around 50 of the eventual 56 signers put their names down that day in Philadelphia. But it wasn't a one-shot deal. Some delegates who had voted for it weren't there on August 2nd and signed later when they returned to Congress. And a few delegates who weren't even in Congress on July 4th joined later and added their names too.
So the signing stretched out over time.
It did. Some signed weeks or even months later. There's debate about the very last signer, possibly Thomas McKeon of Delaware, who might not have signed until 1781. He was often away with the army.
Wow. And they didn't publicize the names right away either, did they? For safety.
Exactly. Think about it. Signing that document was literally signing a potential death warrant. It was treason against the king. So the names of the signers weren't officially released to the public until January 1777. They needed some measure of security.
So that August 2nd signing, even if not everyone was there, was hugely important symbolically.
Absolutely crucial. It was the moment these individuals publicly, or at least officially within Congress, pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, as the Declaration says. It demonstrated unity, made the commitment tangible and personal. It gave the Declaration immense weight, showing these weren't just abstract principles, but a cause people were willing to die for.
Okay, my head is spinning slightly. Let's just recap the key dates here. July 2nd, the actual vote for independence, the legal break, Adams's pick for the holiday.
Right, the decision day.
July 4th, the day the text of the Declaration of Independence document was finalized, adopted, signed by Hancock and Thompson, and sent to the printer. The date on the announcement.
The announcement day, the day on the paperwork everyone saw first.
August 2nd, the day most of the delegates formally signed the fancy parchment copy, pledging their commitment.
The main signing day, solidifying the pact.
So with all these significant dates, how on earth did July 4th become the one? The undisputed national holiday. What tipped the scales so decisively?
Right, that's the million-dollar question. And to really get at the answer, we need to dive back into the dynamics within Congress around that crucial July 1st and 2nd period, because the push for unanimity was incredibly important. And a key figure here, perhaps unexpectedly, is Edward Rutledge.
Edward Rutledge, from South Carolina.
That's him, delegate from South Carolina. And remarkably, he was only 26 years old at the time, the youngest signer of the Declaration.
26. That's incredible pressure.
Immense. And what makes him so interesting in this context is that he wasn't initially gung-ho for independence. Far from it.
Really, I always picture them as all being radicals by this point.
Not Rutledge, not initially. He was very much a moderate voice. He was actually quite resistant to a quick, decisive break from Britain. He urged caution.
So he was a skeptic. What were his arguments?
His arguments were purely pragmatic, based on strategy, not lingering loyalty. He laid them out pretty clearly. In late June 1776, as the debate over Lee's resolution was heating up, Rutledge wrote a letter to John Jay.
Another important figure.
Right, from New York. And Rutledge was blunt. He said essentially that the sensible part of the House, meaning the cautious delegates, saw no wisdom in a Declaration of Independence right then. He even called the whole idea, and this is a direct quote, a mad stunt or a madman's project.
Wow. Strong words. Why did he think it was so reckless?
His reasoning was all about preparedness. He believed quite strongly that before declaring independence, the colonies absolutely needed to do two things first. One, solidify their own union, form a proper confederation, a functioning government structure. Two, secure firm foreign alliances, especially with France. Get guarantees of military and financial support before making the break.
Okay, so his fear was declaring independence too soon would leave them weak and isolated.
Exactly. He feared a premature declaration born out of passion rather than planning would leave the colonies vulnerable, easy pickings for the British Empire. It was about ensuring they had a realistic chance of winning before they jumped off the cliff. Prudence over passion.
That makes a lot of sense strategically. It wasn't anti-independence, it was pro-successful independence. A subtle but really important distinction.
It really is. It shows the depth of the debate. These weren't just yes men. They were wrestling with incredibly difficult strategic choices. Rutledge sounds less like an obstacle and more like someone trying to ensure the foundation was solid.
So how did this cautious delegate end up playing a key role?
Well, this is where his pragmatism really shines. On July 1st, 1776, they held a preliminary vote, a sort of test vote, on Lee's resolution. And just as Rutledge likely expected, the colonies weren't unanimous. South Carolina, led by Rutledge, voted against independence.
Okay, so they stuck to their cautious stance.
They did, and Pennsylvania also voted nay. Plus, Delaware's delegation was split right down the middle, so they couldn't cast a vote.
So, not the unified front they wanted.
Not at all. While a majority favored independence, there was real hesitation about moving forward without broader consensus. Unanimity was seen as crucial, both symbolically and practically.
Yeah, a divided declaration wouldn't look good to potential allies, or even to people at home.
Precisely. It would signal weakness. And Rutledge understood this perfectly. Even though he personally still had reservations about the timing, he could read the room. He knew independence was probably going to pass eventually. But he was determined, absolutely determined, that if it passed, it had to look unanimous to the outside world.
The optics were critical.
Hugely critical. He argued passionately against showing any division at the moment of separation. He knew it would undermine the cause, so he made a very clever tactical move. He motioned to delay the final official vote until the next day, July 2nd.
Buying time.
Exactly, just 24 hours. But it was enough. In that time, he worked frantically behind the scenes. He lobbied his fellow South Carolina delegates relentlessly. He appealed to their sense of patriotism, the need for unity, arguing that even if they had doubts, they needed to vote aye for the greater good.
Putting colonial unity above their state's initial preference?
Yes. He also likely knew that Delaware's deadlock would probably break in favor of independence if their third delegate, Caesar Rodney, made it back to Philadelphia in time, which he famously did, riding through the night. And he perhaps anticipated that some Pennsylvania opponents might just abstain, allowing that colony to switch its vote too.
So Rutledge wasn't just a skeptic who got overruled. He became an architect of the consensus. He actively maneuvered to create that image of unity, even if it meant swallowing some of his own reservations. That's quite a turnaround.
It's an incredible display of political skill and, ultimately, patriotism. He put the collective goal ahead of his personal or state-level concerns about timing, and his efforts were spectacularly successful. On July 2nd, when the final vote was taken, South Carolina dramatically reversed its position and voted aye.
Wow.
Pennsylvania also switched to aye, likely due to some abstentions, and Delaware, with Rodney present, voted aye too. The result, the resolution for independence passed 12-0.
12-0. What about the 13th colony?
Ah, good catch. New York abstained initially. Their delegates hadn't received instructions yet, but they did get authorization later and formally approved it on July 9th. But on July 2nd, the vote that mattered for passing the resolution was effectively unanimous among the colonies present and voting. 12-4, none against.
And Rutledge's maneuvering was key to achieving that crucial 12-0.
Absolutely critical. His insistence on unity, his willingness to persuade his own delegation for the sake of that unified front, gave the entire act immense symbolic power. As one historian put it, Rutledge helped create the appearance of unanimity to strengthen the Patriots' stand. It told the world, especially potential allies like France, that America was united in this decision.
And then, to seal his commitment, Rutledge signed the declaration on August 2nd with the others.
He did. He put his name right there on the parchment along with the majority of delegates. It's a powerful symbol of his ultimate commitment despite those earlier, very pragmatic doubts.
It also brings us back to the compromises involved, doesn't it? Because achieving that unity sometimes meant difficult choices, like the issue of slavery in the Declaration draft.
Yes, that's a crucial and painful part of the story. Jefferson's original draft included a strong condemnation of the slave trade, blaming King George for forcing it on the colonies.
But that part got cut out, right?
It did. It was removed during the congressional debates, largely to appease delegates from South Carolina and Georgia, where the economy was heavily dependent on enslaved labor.
And Rutledge being from South Carolina and a slave owner himself.
It's almost certain he would have supported removing that clause. For him, the priority, the overriding goal, was achieving independence through unity. Addressing the divisive issue of slavery head-on at that moment would have shattered that unity.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? The founding was full of high ideals, but also practical, sometimes deeply troubling, compromises made in the name of achieving the primary goal.
Absolutely. Rutledge's entire arc here, from skeptic to architect of unity to signer, embodies that complex reality. It shows the intense pressures, the strategic thinking, and the difficult choices involved in birthing a nation.
And his story didn't end there, did it? Rutledge continued to serve.
Oh, yes. His commitment was long-term. Just a couple of months after signing, in September '76, he was chosen, along with giants like Ben Franklin and John Adams, to meet with British Admiral Lord Howe for a peace conference on Staten Island.
Which didn't work out, obviously.
No, the gap was too wide by then. But it shows his standing. He then served in the South Carolina legislature, fought in the militia. He was actually captured by the British when Charleston fell in 1780.
Wow, a prisoner of war.
Yes, held for about a year. After the war, he remained a major political figure in South Carolina, eventually becoming governor in the late 1790s. His whole career really underscores his dedication to the American cause he helped, somewhat reluctantly at first, to launch.
So, okay. Rutledge helps ensure the July 2nd vote is unanimous, making it powerful. He signs the document on August 2nd. But we still keep coming back to July 4th. Why did that date, the date of the announcement, the document, become the one fixed in everyone's mind? How did it win? This is where we get into the practical side of things, right?
Yeah.
How does a date actually become the national holiday It sounds like it boils down to, well, good old-fashioned communication visibility.
That's a huge part of it. You nailed it earlier. July 4th had the better PR. And the simplest reason is the most obvious one. The date was printed right at the top.
In Congress, July 4th, 1776. Big and bold.
Exactly. That headline was unavoidable. It was the first thing anyone saw when they got hold of the Declaration.
And they got hold of it quickly, thanks to those Dunlap broadsides.
Super quickly for the time. Hancock knew speed was essential. Get the news out. So off it went to John Dunlap, the printer, on the evening of the 4th. And Dunlap worked through the night. Imagine the scene: presses running, ink flying, churning out roughly 200 copies of this momentous announcement.
Posters, essentially.
Yeah, large single sheets, easy to post up or read aloud. And crucially, they had Hancock's name printed at the bottom, the official stamp of Congress. These weren't rumors. This was the official word.
And these got sent everywhere.
Everywhere important. To George Washington and the Continental Army, to the various state assemblies, to committees of safety in towns across the colonies. They spread like wildfire. They were read aloud in town squares, from church pulpits, at military gatherings.
So the document people actually saw, the physical evidence of independence they held in their hands or heard read aloud, was dated July 4th. That date became immediately associated with the news itself.
Precisely. It wasn't the behind-the-scenes vote on the 2nd that captured the public imagination. It was the tangible declaration, the announcement dated the 4th. That's what people reacted to.
And those reactions started pretty quickly.
They did. The first major public reading happened just 4 days later, on July 8, 1776, right there in Philadelphia in what we now call Independence Square.
Who read it?
Colonel John Nixon read it aloud to a large crowd. And that reading basically kicked off the first public celebration.
So the celebrating started after the 4th, tied to the document's release.
Exactly. As news spread via those broadsides and by word of mouth, similar celebrations erupted spontaneously. People cheered, rang bells, lit bonfires.
Tore down statues of King George.
Famously, yes. In New York City, they pulled down a lead statue of the king and melted it down to make musket balls for the Continental Army. Talk about symbolic.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So these earliest celebrations were directly fueled by the July 4th document. The public connected independence with that date from the very beginning.
And it's interesting, as you mentioned, Congress itself didn't really hold a formal celebration in 1776. They were a bit busy trying to run a war in a new country.
Understandable.
But the first anniversary commemoration, that happened right on schedule, July 4, 1777.
Even with the war still raging.
Yep, right in Philadelphia. And they didn't hold back. It set the template for future celebrations.
What did they do?
It was quite elaborate. Bells ringing all day, ships in the harbor decked out in flags, parades, music. That evening, there was an official dinner, lots of toasts.
13 toasts.
Oh, I bet. 13 toasts, 13 cannon salutes. And then the grand finale, fireworks. 13 rockets fired into the night sky, one for each state. The first official fireworks display.
So the fireworks tradition goes right back to the very first anniversary.
It does, and General Washington got in on the act, too. On July 4, 1778, he ordered double rations of rum for his troops to mark the occasion. Even in the midst of war, the date was becoming significant, a morale booster.
These early celebrations, happening consistently on July 4th, really cemented it, didn't they? It just felt like the right day.
It seemed to make sense. The public had latched onto the date on the Declaration, and the annual commemorations reinforced that connection year after year. John Adams's prediction of bonfires and illuminations came true just on the 4th, not the 2nd.
It's fascinating how tradition takes hold. So it started organically, then became more established.
Exactly. It grew over time. It was the formal recognition of what everyone already knew and practiced. And crucially, no other date ever seriously challenged it. No big movement to celebrate July 2nd or August 2nd ever took off. July 4th had won.
So, bottom line, July 4th suck because it was the date on the widely circulated birth announcement. It had the visibility, the better PR, and the annual celebrations locked it in.
That's pretty much the story. The public announcement overshadowed the internal decision. It became the symbolic birthday, even if the legal conception, you might say, was 2 days earlier.
So, bringing this all forward to today, we understand the history now, the 2nd, the 4th, the compromises, the way the date stuck. What does Independence Day mean for us now, living the 21st century? Beyond the history lesson.
Well, on the most fundamental level, it's still about celebrating those core ideals, isn't it? Liberty, equality, the pursuit of happiness, that revolutionary idea that government derives its power from the consent of the governed.
The big ideas from the Declaration.
Exactly. Those words still have power. It's a moment to reflect on the founding principles, the aspirations the nation was built on.
And culturally, it's a huge day for national identity, right? A shared experience.
It really is. It's one of the few moments where the whole country sort of pauses together. It reinforces a sense of shared history and national belonging. But I think increasingly, modern Independence Day is also about acknowledging the complexities. It's not just a simple birthday party.
What do you mean by complexities?
Well, recognizing that the Declaration laid out these incredible ideals in 1776, but the reality of American history has been a long, often difficult struggle to live up to them. For everyone.
The gap between the promise and the reality.
Precisely. Independence wasn't achieved in a single day, and neither was equality or true liberty for all inhabitants of the land. It involved war, sacrifice, and ongoing struggles over civil rights, inclusion, and justice that continue today.
So acknowledging that history, slavery, the treatment of Native Americans, the fight for women's suffrage, civil rights movements, is part of understanding Independence Day now.
I think it has to be for a richer understanding. It's about celebrating the ideals while also confronting the times the nation has fallen short and acknowledging the work that still needs to be done. It's about honoring the progress made, often through immense struggle and sacrifice, while recognizing the journey isn't over. It makes the celebration more meaningful, perhaps more honest.
That definitely adds depth. It's not just rah-rah patriotism, but a more thoughtful reflection on the American experiment, warts and all.
Exactly. It encourages critical thinking about what those ideals mean today and how we continue to strive for that more perfect union.
And amidst all that deep reflection, we still have the traditions. The fireworks especially. It's amazing that's been going since 1777.
It really is. Talk about an enduring tradition. Fireworks are just inseparable from the 4th now.
Yeah, the parades, the BBQs, the picnics, families getting together.
All of that contributes to the shared experience. It blends the serious history with pure, simple celebration and community connection. It fulfills John Adams's vision, ironically enough.
The pomp and parade. Bonfires and illuminations. Just 2 days later than he planned.
And speaking of Adams and historical quirks, the coincidences surrounding July 4th itself are just astonishing, really add to the mystique.
Oh yeah, the deaths.
Unbelievable. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, two absolute titans of the founding era, fierce rivals at times, collaborators at others, both instrumental in the Declaration. They both died on July 4th, 1826.
Exactly 50 years to the day after the Declaration was adopted. You couldn't make it up.
It's almost too poetic to be true, but it is. The 50th anniversary, the Jubilee year, both passing on the same day. Adams's supposed last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives," unaware Jefferson had died just hours earlier.
Chills. It adds such a layer of destiny or fate to the date.
It really does. And they weren't the only presidents connected to the date. James Monroe, the 5th president, also died on July 4th, just a few years later in 1831.
3 presidents dying on the nation's birthday. That's remarkable.
And then there's Calvin Coolidge, the 30th president. He's the only president actually born on July 4th in 1872.
So, births and deaths of presidents tied to the 4th. These coincidences just weave themselves into the holiday's legend. Okay, so let's try to pull all these threads together. This journey of how July 4th became Independence Day, it's quite a ride. It starts with a real legal break, the vote on July 2nd, Adams's preferred day.
The decisive act.
But then the power of the printed word takes over. The Declaration, dated July 4th, gets circulated everywhere, and that becomes the date people see and react to.
The announcement becomes the event in public memory.
And we can't forget the crucial background maneuvering, like Edward Rutledge pushing for that appearance of unanimity on July 2nd, which gave the whole thing more weight.
Right, the strategic groundwork that made the Declaration more powerful.
And through early celebrations, state recognition, and finally federal law, July 4th gets locked in. It just became the day that felt right, the day that made sense for celebrating.
It became the nation's symbolic birthday, the date on the birth certificate. Even if the actual birth pain started a couple of days earlier, it's a perfect mix of solemn history and, summer party vibes. It represents that bold proclamation to the world. And really, understanding all this history, the July 2nd vote, the July 4th document, the August 2nd signing, the debates, the compromises, like Rutledge's push for unity, it doesn't take away from the holiday. I think it makes it richer. It reminds you that independence wasn't inevitable or easy. It was messy, controversial, and required incredible courage and difficult choices from complex individuals.
People with doubts and different strategies, not just a monolithic block.
Exactly. Seeing figures like Rutledge grapple with the decision, prioritize unity, and ultimately commit, it humanizes the whole founding story. July 4th endures not just because of a vote or a signature, but because it symbolizes that public, defiant statement of identity and ideals that launched a nation.
So here's a final thought for you. When you're out there this July 4th, maybe watching the fireworks, hearing the music, enjoying that pomp and parade that John Adams envisioned, take a second to think about that history. You're not just celebrating a date. You're echoing those very first celebrations back in 1776 and 77. You're celebrating the whole complicated, messy, courageous process of how a nation decided to exist, found its voice, argued its way to unity, and declared itself to the world. Whether you think the real birthday is the 2nd or the 4th, the spirit remains, honoring independence and that incredible ongoing journey. Thanks for exploring America's birthday with us on the Curiosity Exchange by Fahambo Studios.